Tonight's presentation is titled Disastrous Annual. Our presenter is Mike Bush. Mike is president of Savvy Aviation Incorporated, and he's an author for numerous aviation publications. Mike holds a certified flight instructor certificate, AMP mechanic certificate with an inspection authorization, 2008 FAA Aviation Maintenance Technician of the Year, and a member of EAA. Mike, thank you so much for being with us right on the heels of a very productive air venture, I'm sure, for you. I'm going to turn control of the presentation over to you.
Well, good evening, Tim. Good evening, everybody. So I'm a numerous. Sounds like I'm not the only person who isn't fully recovered from air venture, but I have to say it was an excellent air venture, and it's probably the best weather that I can remember. Going to Oshkosh for so many years, I can't even remember how many, but it's been a lot. But it was a fabulous weather, and I did 13 presentations, and it was all good. So on a more downbeat note, I'm going to tell you guys a sad story today about a disastrous annual, and it's a story that I think will has some lessons learned for every aircraft owner, and it's why I decided to tell it. And it involves a twin beach. Oh, okay. And it involves the owner of a Southern California flight school, who I'll call Chuck for the purposes of this presentation, who operates 10 airplanes in his flight school, mostly 172s and Piper Archers and Arrows, plus a Seneca Cessna 140 tail dragger. So mostly small, pretty simple airplanes. And with a fleet like that, 10 airplanes, Chuck has a lot of experience with airplane maintenance and annual inspections. So he's not the sort of person you'd expect to get into maintenance deep kimchi. But unfortunately, that's exactly what happened. And I will tell you the story about it. Chuck wanted to expand his business to provide air tours. So he purchased a 1957 Twin Beach E18, paid about $160,000 for it with the help of a bank loan. Spent another $40,000 to upgrade the avionics, so he wound up having about $200,000 invested in this Twin Beach. All was good until it came time for the first annual inspection on Chuck's watch. His regular mechanics didn't have any Beech 18 experience, so Chuck made a decision to fly the airplane quite a long distance away, 350 nautical miles, north up to a Beech 18 specialty shop up in Northern California. That was well known and apparently well respected in the Beech 18 community. When he delivered the airplane, Chuck told the shop's owner that he would be using the Twin Beach for air tour operation, and that he wanted to make sure that it was safe and airworthy. Now, Chuck's frame of reference, based on his flight school experience with these 10 fairly simple airplanes, was that annual inspections normally take 5 to 10 days and cost $3,000 or $4,000, depending on the complexity of the aircraft involved. But the big Twin Beach was significantly more complex than what he was used to, so he expected this annual to take longer and cost more than the annuals on his flight school airplanes. And he was certainly right about that. So when Chuck delivered the Beech 18 to the shop, The shop owner promised him that he would do his best to get the plane ready soon. That was as definite a delivery date as he was able to get. Communication from the shop was sparse after that, but Chuck presumed that the inspection was progressing normally. After 3 months, Chuck received an email from the shop containing an extensive squawk list, but with no estimates of what repairs would cost. Chuck repeatedly asked the shop for cost estimates, but received only vague replies from the shop. 5 months into this annual, the shop emailed Chuck stating that he needed to send them a check for $20,000 as a deposit for parts and supplies that the shop would have to buy. Chuck sent the $20,000 check as requested, and once again asked for repair estimates and an ETA for completion, but received no response. Months passed with no communication from the shop. And then in month 9, the shop emailed Chuck to say that they expected to have the airplane finished by the end of month 10. But that date came and went. And then in month 13, it's more than a year now, Chuck received an email from the shop owner apologizing for the delays and saying that they couldn't provide a specific ETA, but they will get it finished as soon as they can. Okay, so after more than a year without any specific cost estimates, without any specific delivery date, Chuck had had enough, so he jumped in an airplane and he flew the 350 nautical miles up to the shop to see firsthand what the heck was going on. He arrived to find the shop owner and his 2 mechanics working on his plane, and he asked where things stood. One mechanic was working on the engines. He told Chuck that one engine was done and he just started work on the other engine. Now, this is 13 months into this annual, and they've only gotten one engine inspected. The other mechanic who was working on the airframe explained the work that he had been doing, and Chuck told me, he said, much of what they said sounded more like a full show plane restoration than a normal annual inspection, even though I said from the beginning that I just wanted the airplane to be safe and airworthy. Chuck told the shop owner he wanted his airplane back. The shop owner replied that he hoped to have it finished in another 2 months. Chuck flew home dejected with thoughts that he probably ought to just sell the airplane, which had turned out to be such a money pit. And then 15 months into this annual, Chuck received an email from the shop containing an invoice for $76,000 for the work that had been done so far. And that's on top of the $20,000 that he'd already paid the shop. And that wasn't going to be the final invoice, because they weren't done with the airplane. But this was an invoice just for the work they'd done so far. And it became apparent to Chuck that the shop had not worked on the airplane since Chuck's visit, and would do no further work on the airplane until the $76,000 bill was paid. So no ETA for completion, no estimate of how much the remaining work would cost. And so Chuck was kind of crying on my shoulder. He said, for 15 months, I've been making loan and insurance payment on an airplane I can't fly, for an air tour operation I can't start. Is this sort of thing common? Do I have any recourse? Should I threaten legal action? Or would that just make things worse? All good questions. I told Chuck that I felt his pain, but that unfortunately his story is a distressingly common one that I've seen play out many times before. Although I must say, Chuck's was more dramatic than most. I've seldom seen annual inspections go on for 15 months. If you put your airplane in the shop for an annual inspection, especially a shop that you haven't dealt with before, you need to take steps to keep the shop on a short leash. Specifically, you need to give the shop written instructions along the following lines. You are hereby authorized to perform an annual inspection on the aircraft, but you are not authorized to perform any repairs or order any parts until you have completed the inspection, prepared a detailed discrepancy list with cost estimates, including both parts and labor, to repair each listed discrepancy, and sent it to me for my approval or disapproval. If you don't explicitly limit what the shop is and isn't authorized to do, you have effectively given the shop carte blanche to do whatever they want and to bill you whatever they deem appropriate for whatever they did. And so you basically completely lost control of the process, which is what happened with Chuck. In the absence of a well-defined contract limiting the shop's authorized scope of work, you generally have little recourse if the shop runs up an astronomical bill and demands that you pay it before they release the aircraft. And giving them instructions in writing along the lines that I've said, that they're authorized to do the inspection, but not to do any repairs or order any parts until they have given you the discrepancy list, listing each discrepancy in detail with repair estimates for each one. And if you refuse to pay the shop's bill or threaten legal action, the shop may simply file an aircraft mechanics lien on your aircraft, which encumbers the title of the aircraft and makes it effectively unsellable. I'm dealing with a lawyer right now on another aircraft where a shop filed a mechanics lien and put the owner in a very difficult situation. Then if you still refuse to pay the shop's bill, the shop can go to court and file to foreclose against your aircraft, permitting it to be sold at auction to satisfy your alleged indebtedness. Now, the rules about mechanics liens vary quite a bit from one state to another. And it was fortunate for Chuck that that the aircraft and the shop were in the state of California, because it turns out that the California Business and Professions Code has a specific set of paragraphs that limit mechanics liens against GA aircraft to cases in which the shop or mechanic provided a written estimate to the owner and the owner signed it, which obviously didn't happen in Chuck's case. Therefore, my best guess is that the shop would not be able to obtain a legally valid mechanics lien against Chuck's Beech 18. But they have plenty of other ways to make Chuck's life miserable until he agrees to pay their bill. They can cease working on the airplane, which is apparently what they did. They can refuse to put it back together in flyable condition. They can decline to sign a safe to ferry logbook entry, which is what Chuck would need to obtain a ferry permit from the FSDO to fly the airplane back home. So, I've seen this scenario play out many times, and unless you enter into a written agreement with the shop limiting the scope of what the shop is authorized to do, the shop basically holds all the cards and you have very little leverage. Sadly, Chuck handed his Beech 18 over to the shop with nothing more than a handshake, a smile, and a verbal promise to have the airplane ready soon. Now, I'm not an attorney. I could not give Chuck legal advice, but I advised him to contact an aviation attorney with experience with GA maintenance issues. And I said AOPA could probably help him locate one. And if he was a member of AOPA's pilot protection services, he might even be entitled to consultation with the attorney at no charge. I cautioned Chuck that until he consulted with an aviation attorney, he should not say anything to the shop indicating that he was not going to pay their invoice and thereby trigger a retaliatory action. And I also said that I thought the most likely way to end this sad saga would be for Chuck to agree to pay the shop's invoice, as extortionate as it was, on the condition that the shop would reassemble the plane in flyable condition and provide a safe to ferry entry, enabling Chuck to obtain a ferry permit from the local FSDO that would let him fly the plane home and deal with any unresolved airworthiness issues back home, where he had a lot more control over the situation. So Chuck's experience should be a cautionary lesson for every aircraft owner. Never allow a shop to perform repairs or order parts until the inspection is complete and you have a detailed discrepancy list with cost estimates for parts and labor for each discrepancy. This usually takes the form of a work order at most shops. A lot of shops prefer to do annual inspections in a manner where they inspect and repair as they find things wrong. I call it inspect a little, repair a little, lather, rinse, repeat. And that's more efficient for the shop, but it essentially eliminates any control that the owner has over the scope of the work that's going to be done. And so it's a very dangerous way to operate. So once you get this discrepancy list with repair estimates, then you can go through it line by line and decide which repairs you want to approve and which you want to decline. And you know, when my company manages annual inspections, we typically decline a lot of things. You know, I remember one Cirrus SR-22 that went in for an annual, and the shop came back with a 34 item discrepancy list with estimates, repair estimates of, I guess it was $25,000. And we went through the work order with the owner and came back to the shop and approved 11 of the items, declined 23 of them, and reduced the $25,000 bill to a $5,000 bill. But the only way you can do that is to get the shop to do the complete inspection first before they start any repairs, and to provide you with a discrepancy list that you can go through. See, this is the only way you can protect yourself from an annual spiraling out of control the way Chuck's did. And this is especially important in a case like Chuck's, where he was dealing with a shop that he had no history with. But I think it's important for every annual inspection. And Tim, that's all the prepared material I have, but I'd be glad to open it up for some Q&A.
All right, Mike. Short and sweet. Boy, what a brilliant message you just gave us all, though. So clearly communicated. Thank you very much. Power.
Short, sweet, and sad.
Sure. Well, it's very sad. I mean,
Yeah,
it's you know, when you hear the story, it's like, this can't be true. Sad, you know.
Yeah, it really is. I couldn't believe how. And I have to tell you that I told this story, and I've had a number of people say, I think I know what shop you're talking about. I'm not about to name names, but
no need to go there. Yeah.
Apparently, Chuck wasn't the only person that's experienced this.
Well, you know, one thing I love about your webinars, Mike, is I'm sure that mechanics are listening tonight to this, and probably some of them work for these shops and maybe even able to make these decisions, and then they're kind of learning, hey, you know, this is the way to treat customers and to do business, so
Yeah.
this is all good. Power to the aircraft owner. Hey, let's start with questions here rather than chit chat. So let's see here. Bart says, I have had many annuals done with my mechanic on a handshake and a smile with no surprises. Should I be changing the approach now that I take?
Well, I do think that I mean my recommendation would be that you do ask the mechanic to complete the inspection phase and provide you with a discrepancy list before he proceeds to doing any repairs or ordering any parts. I just think that's the safest way to do it, and I've had clients who have used the same mechanic for years and had no issues, and then all of a sudden one annual they get a nasty surprise. And the only way to protect yourself against nasty surprises is to do the inspection first and the repairs second.
So I like your recommendation to, in writing, inform the shop what you're authorizing them. And Wendy is asking, would you put that slide up again with the wording to tell the shop to do the annual?
Okay, I think it was 2 slides actually. Let me see if I can find it. Talk amongst yourselves. I'm trying to find it here. Okay, here's the first slide.
Yeah, I think that's what Wendy was looking for.
Okay.
So everybody should probably take a screenshot of that, pull out your phone or something and take a picture of it. What a beautiful thing to do. Hand over, authorize the shop by giving them that in writing.
Right, and this was the second part of it.
All one statement though.
Yes, correct.
Great. So Joseph was just wondering, is a discrepancy list common practice among shops?
Well, the discrepancy list is essentially mandatory, but not every shop will provide the discrepancy list for the owner and say, okay, here's what we found. What would you like us to do? Which is what we always want to have happen. And so, the most professional shops we work with do that as a matter of course, because the alternative to providing the discrepancy list for the owner and saying, what would you like us to do, is to present an invoice to the owner and the owner be surprised by it, and then there's a fight over the invoice. Fights over the invoice are very unpleasant and usually not particularly productive. And it's much better for everybody, particularly for the shop, to avoid having a dispute over the invoice. The best way to do that is to provide the owner with a detailed list of what discrepancies were found and what repairs are recommended, and what they're going to cost, and which discrepancies are airworthiness issues and which discrepancies are less than airworthiness issues that the owner is free to approve or decline at his discretion. And that is the way that makes things work smoothly for everybody. And as I said, the most professional shops we work with do that as a matter of course, and it's just smart business. But an awful lot of shops, particularly smaller ones, like this 3-man shop that Chuck was using, don't do it as a matter of course. And they basically say, thanks for the airplane, go away, leave us alone, let us do our job, and we'll give you we'll tell you when it's done and send you an invoice. And that's a setup for surprises and unwelcome surprises and stuff, which we always want to try to avoid.
Yeah. John was wondering, how do you handle a dispute if a discrepancy, how do you handle a dispute on if a discrepancy is an airworthiness issue or not?
Well, we've run into shops that as a matter of routine call everything an airworthiness issue, and we've had to push back on that because obviously, I mean, most of the time, only a small fraction of the discrepancies found during an inspection are airworthiness issues. So, I mean, the way you handle that is you go and you say, show me why it's an airworthiness issue. What aspect of the type design does the aircraft not conform with, for example? And just basically challenge the basis on which it was determined that it was an airworthiness issue. Mm-hmm. And generally, when we push back on shops, they tend to be pretty reasonable, and they back off on stuff that really isn't airworthiness. And if the worst comes to the worst, which it doesn't very often, and you get into a disagreement that can't be resolved, where there's some discrepancy that the shop says we can't sign off the annual as airworthy unless you make this repair, this expensive repair usually, and the owner says, I don't want to do this repair, and I don't think it's necessary. The owner always has the option of asking the shop to sign off the annual as unairworthy with a discrepancy list, and then he can take the airplane to anybody he wants to deal with the alleged discrepancy. And if it's a phony discrepancy, if it's one that isn't really an airworthiness item, then you find some other A&P that has his head screwed on correctly. It doesn't need to be an IA, and ask him to clear the discrepancy for you.
Charles wonders, and if one has a quote-unquote safe to fly logbook entry, how long does it take to get a ferry permit from the FSDO?
Typically no more than 24 hours. It's usually just a matter of sending an email to the FSDO. You fill out an FAA form requesting the ferry permit, and you email it to the FSDO. And it's a good idea to also attach the safe to ferry logbook entry, which is what the FSDO is going to need. In the absence of a safe to ferry logbook entry, the FSDO is going to have to send an inspector out to look at your airplane, and that's the last thing in the world either they want to do or you want them to do. So it's really important to have a safe to ferry logbook entry. But a safe to ferry logbook entry is a very low standard. It doesn't mean that the airplane is airworthy, because if it was airworthy, we need a ferry permit. All it means is, in Chuck's case, that the airplane is safe to fly, one more flight of 350 nautical miles. So it's a very low standard, and there's probably no reason that the shop wouldn't provide a safe to ferry logbook entry unless they're just being nasty.
Fran wonders, can a normal A&P sign off the discrepancy list and be done, or does it go back to the IA for signature?
The discrepancies, once they're documented, can be corrected by any A&P, and in some discrepancies could even be corrected by the owner if the correction amounted to preventive maintenance. For example, if one of the discrepancies was, you know, the tire is worn out and it's showing cord, that's something that an owner could do himself if he wanted to, because changing tires is something owners are allowed to do. But it doesn't have to go back to the original IA. The IA's job in an annual inspection is to document the discrepancies. That's really the annual inspection, is to go over the airplane with a checklist and come back with a list of discrepancies. The IA's job is not necessarily to fix any of those discrepancies unless you ask him to. And it seems to me that, you know, if you're going to ask him to fix any discrepancies, before you do that, you ought to have some written estimates of what correction of each of the discrepancies are going to cost. So that, first of all, there's not going to be any surprises when you get the invoice, and second of all, so you can make an educated decision about what discrepancies you want him to fix and what discrepancies you want to defer or just decline.
Several people have wondered this. David's question is, did the beach owner get his plane online and working?
I think he got his airplane back. Whether he did the air tour thing, I don't know. He was pretty discouraged about the whole thing, as you can imagine. This was just a financial catastrophe for him.
Mm-hmm. And David was wondering, I don't hear these kinds of horror stories in the automobile industry. Is there something we can apply to the aviation industry that would keep this from happening?
Well, one of the reasons you don't usually hear about this in the automotive industry is that almost every state has a Bureau of Automotive Repair, or it's not always called that, but something like that. And the automotive shops are all licensed by the state, and they operate under a bunch of very specific requirements. And one of the requirements is that before they can work on your car, they have to provide you with a set of written estimates of what the repair is going to cost. They have to get your John Hancock on that on those estimates before they're allowed to work on the car. And then they're not allowed to exceed the estimates they've given you. Sometimes they're allowed to exceed it by 10% or something, but they're not allowed to materially exceed the estimates they've given you without giving you a revised estimate and asking you to approve it. Usually the revised estimate can be approved over the phone, but the original estimate has to have a signature on it from the motorist. And you know, the question often comes up, well, you know, why don't we have laws like that protecting aircraft owners? And I think the answer is that most legislators are motorists, but very few of them are aircraft owners. So, but I was really interested when I was going through this thing with Chuck to discover that the California does have some language in its business code that does provide some protection for owners, at least with regard to mechanics liens. I know not every state is like that. I think California is a bit of an outlier in that particular regard.
Paul was wondering, is there a standard format for safe to ferry logbook entries specified either in FARs or an advisory circular?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I wouldn't be surprised if there's something about that in an advisory circular, but I'd have to research it to figure out which advisory circular.
And David was wondering, does an owner-assisted annual prevent troubles from coming up?
Oh yeah, that's I mean that's the more involved the owner is in the process, the you know the less likely there are going to be any surprises. Um, you know, to the contrary, in Chuck's case, the fact that he took his plane to a shop he'd never used before, 350 nautical miles away, which made it a little bit difficult to kind of pop in and keep an eye on things. Really put him in a difficult situation. But yeah, an owner-assisted annual or just um, uh, dropping by the shop every couple of days while annual's going on to check on how things are going. All of those are going to help a lot.
Joseph wonders, is this a weekly type of event that is brought to Savvy Aviation to cure?
Um, well, I mean, our job is not to cure these things. Our job is to prevent them from happening. So,
Hmm.
um, there wasn't a lot I could do for Chuck other than let him cry on my shoulder and give him a little advice about contacting an attorney.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's very hard to unbreak eggs, once they're broken. So our job is to prevent these things from happening. And we, one of the chief ways we do that is to absolutely insist on, doing the inspection first, getting the detailed discrepancy list, going over the discrepancy list with the owner, just making educated decisions about what to say yes to, what to say no to. It's amazing how much stuff we say no to. And but we really love shops that come back with a huge discrepancy list, because that just means they're thorough. And shops that do that often get a bad rap among aircraft owners who say, "Oh, that shop's really expensive," But they're only expensive if you say yes to everything. Um, so I would prefer a shop that did a very, very thorough, nitpicky inspection and documented everything in the world, and then uh, go through the discrepancy list and says, okay, what's important to do? What do we really have to do? And what do we want to defer or say no to? And so that's the kind of thing that we do for every client.
That's a really good point you just made, I think. That's a really good point. It'd be great if the discrepancy list were broken down into must do, be nice to do. Yeah, you can think about doing if you got a lot of money to spend. You know what I mean? Wouldn't it be nice if there's 3 columns on the discrepancy list? You
Yeah.
put a check
Well,
mark next
at
to
the
whichever
very
column it
least,
is.
we ask the shops to mark the items on the discrepancy list that they consider to be airworthiness items, and by which I mean items that if we say no to, they're not going to be able to sign off the annual as airworthy.
Mm-hmm.
And typically, in my experience, maybe 20% of the items on a discrepancy list are going to be genuine airworthiness items. I mean, there are things that are just non-negotiable. If it's AD compliance, you have to do it. If it's an airworthiness limitation for a Part 23 airplane, you have to do it. And if it's something that is, blatantly unsafe, you need to do it. But most of the discrepancies that are found are not like that. And so it's a question of how much do we want to do and how much do we want to not do.
Let's see here. Frank said you talked about the aircraft being taken hostage. Can you talk about logbooks in this venue?
Yeah, I don't recall talking about it being taken hostage, but You bring up a point that that I've talked about in these webinars quite often, and that is that one of the retaliatory things that a shop can do, especially for example if there's a dispute over an invoice, is hold the maintenance records hostage, hold the logbooks hostage. And the solution to that, which we do with all of our clients, is to never make the logbooks available to the shop. We provide them copies, typically PDF files, but we don't ever provide them with paper. And we tell our owners that the original paper logbooks, assuming they're keeping paper logbooks, should always be kept in their possession and control, and never given to anybody. Even the FAA or the NTSB are not entitled to the original records. The copies are all that you ever need to give anybody. And we don't ever allow shops to write in the paper logbooks. Their maintenance record entries always have to be on self-adhesive stickers that the owner can then put into the logbook. And one of the reasons we do that is that if the maintenance record is defective in some way, we can send it back for a do-over. But if the shop writes directly in the maintenance records, then it's hard to do that. So and it's interesting. I'm kind of amazed that people are still keeping paper records. I haven't kept a paper maintenance record for my airplane in 15 years. All my maintenance records are in a Dropbox, in a file in my Dropbox where they're not going to burn up and they're not going to get lost. And it's easy for me to provide copies to anybody who needs copies. And I think hopefully it won't be long before that's the normal way to do it. The FAA has an advisory circular, AC 12078A, I think it is, that talks about electronic records. And for Part 91 operators, it's very, very non-demanding, and it's easy to maintain maintenance records electronically. And you can keep images of signatures and stuff in electronically in the file. I'm presently doing mine just in a Microsoft Word file with signatures and stuff posted in there, but I think that there are some more sophisticated ways of doing it. There are several companies that provide electronic maintenance records for GA owners, and I think it's a better way to maintain records.
I wonder if there's a way we can make our smartphone just, take a picture and save it as a PDF. For some reason, I'm thinking an iPhone has that ability, maybe with a special app or something. But I mean, for those of us that have planes with logbooks that might go back, 30, 40, 50 years, and boy, just snap a picture of every one of those pages, and now you got an electronic file of everything that's there.
Yeah, there are smartphone apps that do OCR and so on.
Yeah.
Although we kind of prefer that the records be scanned on a flatbed scanner rather than with a phone, because usually the problem with the phone is usually the pages aren't flat when the photo is taken and so on. So, but if you're really careful, you can get decent images of the logbook pages. But
yeah, so several people weren't quick enough with their phone to take a picture of the screen when you put those 2 pages back up of your recommended guidance to your mechanic. Can we convince you to go back to those 2 pages again, Mike?
You don't have to twist my arm too hard.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, so that's the first page. How long am I to leave that up before I go to the next?
Oh, I don't know. What should we do? Let's do a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That Well, I don't know. How long should we leave it up? Let's see here. How long can we milk this out here?
We've got some slow on the trigger.
Oh, okay. Well, let's go to the
I
next
think
one
this is
then.
enough time. Okay, here's the
Yeah,
second page.
cool. So one of the questions that came in related to this then was Rodney's. He's wondering, is an email sufficient as written evidence of the arrangement with the mechanic and scope of work? What if the shop does not reply via email as acknowledgement? So I guess he's saying, what if you email to the shop what we just showed the audience, basically? And is that, evidence? And what if you don't get a reply back? I guess that's a pretty intense legal question by
Yeah,
Rodney, huh?
that's kind of a legal question. I mean, we typically do everything um, uh, by email or trouble ticket or something, and I would certainly think that an email nowadays is recognized as being the same as a legal document. I mean, it certainly wouldn't be a bad idea to ask for acknowledgement of receipt, or I mean, you can send emails with a return receipt requested on them, which would let where you that would give you proof that it was received by the um, by the party to whom you sent it, presumably the shop. But yeah, we do email all the time, and I think it certainly would be considered just the same as a paper contract.
Yeah. Chris is saying if electronic maintenance records are kept and the shop requests electronic copies of the logs, what prevents the shop from making an entry in the electronic records?
Well, I'm not sure what you mean by that. I mean, you were providing them a copy. I mean, they can do anything they want with the copy we send them, slice it and dice it and throw it in the trash. That's not going to affect our original records. We're not giving them access to our originals if they're electronic records. We're not going to give them the privilege of altering those records. We're just going to give them the privilege of viewing the records.
So then Will asks then, how do you put a self-adhesive sticker on an electronic record?
Well, you you scan it, OCR it, and add it to the record.
Yeah, so it's the electronic scan after each time an entry is made, and then that's what you maintain as the owner of the aircraft. Yeah. Looks like Steven said the Notes app on an iPhone allows a pic to be taken as a PDF. That's what I was thinking. Yeah, and several people are talking about different apps that are available to bring things in as a PDF and different things on your smartphone. Yeah.
And there are also a bunch of OCR apps that run on smartphones.
Mark says, I bought a piece of non-glare glass at an art frame shop and put it on top of the logbook pages to flatten them out so I can shoot a good iPhone photo.
Oh,
And
that's
then
a great
combine
idea.
into a single logbook PDF using the app.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah. Notes also lets you correct for parallax, says Santosh. Okay, so there's ways to do it even with your smartphone.
For sure.
Yeah, I think that's a project for all of us now. Let's digitize, let's get an electronic copy of all those paper logbooks that we have. Because I know you've talked about like pre-buy inspections, and
Yeah.
you would only share those electronic files in a pre-buy inspection, never the real books. And it's so easy then to share all the logs with a prospective person interested in your
Mhm.
aircraft then.
I think that's pretty much expected nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
That the seller will provide the maintenance records in digital format for the prospective buyer to review.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's see here. Vedum says, can an IA put prop on the inspection report only listing critical items he deemed unairworthy? If that prop is past manufacturer specified calendar overhaul period. So what if a prop is past the specified overhaul period by the manufacturer?
If we're talking about a Part 91 airplane, a Part 91 operator, we do not have to pay the slightest attention to manufacturers' TBOs for engines, propellers, or anything else. For Part 91 operators, the manufacturer's TBOs are mere suggestions. They are not requirements. And just because a prop is past TBO or an engine is past TBO does not make the prop or engine unairworthy. It's a little more complicated for commercial operators, but for non-commercial operators, TBOs are not. We don't have to pay attention to TBOs or any other manufacturer specified intervals for that matter.
And Sirvanas was just wondering, how is what you're talking about tonight, Mike, different for experimental planes?
Well, it's not very different. I mean, there are subtle differences in the sense that the word airworthy does not apply to experimental airplanes, which is why experimental airplanes don't have annual inspections. They have annual condition inspections. All of the inspection is required to do on an experimental is determine if it's in condition for safe operation. Whereas for a certificated airplane, the inspection has to determine that it complies with its type design and is in condition for safe operation. Experimentals do not have a type design, so there's nothing to be in compliance with. But the stuff we've been talking about, which is to stay in control of the condition inspection and to not have sticker shock at the end of the process, is exactly the same. And the solution is exactly the same as well, which is to make sure that the condition inspection is done first, and then the remediation of any issues are done afterward, and only after they've been documented with cost estimates for the owner, and the owner's had a chance to go through them and decide what he wants to do.
Quite a few people are asking this question, Mike, in a few different ways, but I'll just ask the one that Michael asked. I'm a new owner with a first annual in 3 months. How can
Oh,
I learn what discrepancies are capital letters required to be fixed versus the nice to be fixed discrepancies?
well, it's a little difficult, really. There, I mean, there are a class of things that I mentioned earlier that absolutely have to be done, which is compliance with airworthiness directives, and if it's an airplane that has airworthiness limitations, typically a Part 23 airplane, compliance with airworthiness limitations, those are required to be done. And any items that the inspector feels are sufficiently egregious that he could not sign off the inspection as airworthy unless it is corrected, those are things you usually don't want to say no to unless you, you know, feel strongly in disagreement. But you typically don't want to say no to something that's going to result in an unairworthy sign off, you know, unless the discrepancy is unreasonable. I mean, for example, your engine is 500 hours over TBO, and the inspector says, "I'm not comfortable signing the engine off as airworthy," and you know the engine's running like a top, and you listen to my TBO 5000 webinar, and you're not about to tear this healthy engine down. So, you know, you could resolve that that problem if it's a problem that, I mean, it's really unreasonable for a mechanic to say I'm not willing to sign off the annual because your engine is 500 hours over TBO, but I've seen it happen. And you know, the way we respond is, okay, if that's your final answer, then sign it off with a discrepancy on the engine, and I'll get the airplane out of your hair and deal with the problem. And about half the time, the IA then thinks very carefully about what he's going to write on the discrepancy list, because writing, you know, the engine is unairworthy because it's 500 hours over TBO doesn't meet the laugh test. Every mechanic knows that Part 91 operators are not required to comply with TBOs. So about half the time, the mechanic will back off and say, "Oh, okay, I'll sign it off this time, but don't bring it back to me next year because I'm not going to sign it off again." And the owner says, "Well, don't worry, I'm not going to bring it back to you next year." But you know, in the most extreme case where the mechanic doesn't back off and signs off the annual as unairworthy with a discrepancy on the engine, all the aircraft owner then has to do is find some A&P, doesn't have to be an IA, any A&P will do, and ask them to perform a 100-hour inspection on the engine, which will take a couple hours, and sign off the engine as airworthy. And hopefully you'll get a mechanic with his head screwed on right who isn't worried about the engine being over TBO. Obviously, that's a question you're going to ask the mechanic at first, which you should have asked the IA before you started the annual, since you knew the engine was over TBO. That's always something that, you know, before you take your airplane to a IA, if you've got an engine over TBO or prop over TBO or something, it only makes sense to say, "Hey, you know, my engine's over TBO. Do you have a problem with that?" And the right answer is no. I have a problem with that as long as, you know, everything looks okay on the engine. But there are some very old school mechanics that still are uncomfortable with engines and propellers over TBO. And so if your engine and propeller are over TBO, you should identify the mechanics and not use them, because there's, you know, you don't want to get into a dispute with an IA if you can possibly avoid it.
Lawrence says that electronic records for maintenance also help when sending a student renting the plane for a check ride, not risking the logbooks out of your control.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that's another reason why you'd have, yeah.
The very, when we get a new client, the very first thing we ask them to do is provide us with scans of their maintenance records.
Lauren was just wondering, should the same approach you've outlined tonight be taken for just normal routine maintenance?
Well, to a degree. Maintenance, you should always ask for an estimate before you approve any work. I mean, most people wouldn't buy a pair of shoes without knowing what the shoes were going to cost first, and it makes no sense to have maintenance done without having an idea what the price tag is going to be, because by the time you get the invoice, it's really too late. They've already done the work. They've already purchased the parts. And, fighting over the invoice after the fact is just an exercise in futility. So to head off those sorts of misunderstandings, it's very important to have cost estimates before you prove that the work is going to proceed. It's you always do that on your car. It's required typically, and if it's okay for cars, it sure ought to be okay for airplanes.
Here's kind of the other side from Daniel wondering, how about an inspection where one cylinder is 35/80? The shop can see an inspection issue, but how does the shop give a solid estimate of cost or repair?
Well, I mean, first of all, if it's a Continental cylinder that's 35/80, the appropriate thing to do is to put a bore scope in there and try to figure out why it's 35/80. And if it looks normal under the bore scope, Continental wants you to go fly the airplane for 45 minutes or more, and then bring it back and recheck that cylinder, repeat the compression test. And I've had clients who had a 38/80 cylinder. The shop wanted to pull the cylinder. We said, no, let's follow the Continental guidance. Stuck a bore scope in there, couldn't find a problem. Flew the airplane for 45 minutes, came back, retested the cylinder, and it was 72/80 on the retest. So that's Continental's guidance on that. But whether it's Continental or Lycoming, I did a webinar called Cylinder Rescue, where talked about the various ways that we remediate low compression cylinders without removing the cylinder. And it's not always possible. It depends on how bad things are. But then occasionally the cylinder does have to get pulled. But it only makes sense to try the non-invasive, remediation before taking the action of pulling the cylinder, which we don't like to pull cylinders, and we do it only as a last resort if we can't solve the problem in a different way.
Lawrence is wondering about hourly rates, wondering what is a reasonable hourly rate these days, and how much markup for parts and outside work is acceptable?
Well, hourly rates vary all over the place, depending on the part of the country and the size of the shop. I've seen hourly rates as low as $60 an hour. Seen hourly rates as high as $140 an hour. My own personal opinion is that shop rates are lower than they should be, and I mean, and the result is that we're developing a huge mechanic shortage. Almost every decent shop that I know of now is booked up pretty close to a year in advance. It's very, very hard to get an airplane into a shop on short notice now. And the shops are having a horrible time trying to hire qualified staff. I mean, that's not only a problem in aircraft maintenance. I know it's kind of a generic problem, but it's painfully obvious in GA maintenance that we don't have enough mechanics, and I don't think that they're paid enough to attract them. I mean, it's typically the shop rates for airplanes are less than shop rates for cars nowadays. Most places I've looked. As far as markup on things, that what the typical industry practice is that shops will charge owners list price for parts that are purchased through the shop, and what markup what discount the shop buys them at varies depending on what it is. I mean, typically it's something like 20%, but things like aircraft batteries, the difference between the wholesale price, if you will, the street price, I guess is what I'd call it, and the list price is huge. And so I've often recommended that owners replace batteries themselves because they can buy it the same price that the shop can buy it. And replacing a battery is something that an owner is allowed to do himself. But if you buy the battery through the shop, there's going to be a huge markup on it because they'll typically sell it to you at list price. So that's kind of the standard procedure. And the real extreme is, for example, if you are replacing an aircraft engine, because it's so expensive, the markup is very significant. And so we'll typically recommend that our clients purchase the engines themselves rather than through the shop and have them drop shipped to the shop. And sometimes it's possible to do that and avoid sales tax too, because the engine is being shipped from a different state. And so if you buy it through the shop, you're going to pay sales tax on the engine. So we're always trying to figure out ways that our customers can get, can not spend any more than they have to.
Mm-hmm. John was wondering, for work done between the maintenance shop and a separate radio shop, for example, do you handle business between shops in the same manner that you discussed tonight?
Tim, I really don't understand the question.
Okay. Well, let's move on to the next question then. Joseph was wondering, does Savvy provide or is able to provide a list of shops they've had good experiences with?
Well, we certainly maintain an extensive database, but we don't publish it. And we've been asked many times if we can provide some kind of a good housekeeping seal of approval for shops, and we don't do that because we need to be on good terms with all the shops, even the ones that we don't like particularly, because we never know when a client or it's going to be AOG with a problem at some shop, and we don't want to be alienating them. So, like I say, we maintain an extensive database of shops, and we have internal ratings, so we can easily find. Actually, we even have a Google map with icons where the shops are located, and they're color coded based on our experience, but we don't publish it. That's just internal information.
Gordon is wondering if your plane was inspected before the end of the 12th month of the annual period. Can you fly your plane to another shop without needing a ferry permit, but the plane has identified airworthy items?
No, you can't. The act of performing the inspection basically supersedes the previous inspection, and you know, even if you had the inspection done 6 months after the previous inspection, the previous inspection is superseded. And if the airplane has airworthiness issues that came up in the second inspection, then they either have to be corrected, or you need to get a ferry permit to fly the airplane somewhere to get them corrected.
And Justin was wondering, is it true that an expired annual, which includes an expired AD item inspection, does not qualify for a ferry permit?
Well, I'm not 100% sure what the question means, but it is fairly routine to get a ferry permit for an airplane whose annual has expired. However, in order to get the ferry permit, you have to verify to the FAA that all ADs have been complied with before they'll issue the ferry permit. So you typically can't get a ferry permit. Well, I take it back. There are some ADs that state explicitly that a ferry permit may be provided to move the airplane to a place where the AD can be complied with. Most ADs don't say that. If any of those typical ADs are not complied with, then it's going to be hard to get a ferry permit.
Well, Mike, that pretty much wraps up the questions that we have in here tonight. A few minutes early here. Let's take a moment and close it up here. Looks like we had about 650 people on with us tonight. Take a moment, share closing thoughts with everybody.
Well, I'm not sure I have any closing thoughts, but if you'd like to get on my email list for our monthly newsletter and our stories that we send out every few weeks about interesting maintenance situations that we've gotten into and how they got resolved, the easiest way to do that is to pick up your phone and text the word SAVVY, SAVVY, to 33777, and that'll put you on the list. I did find out that doesn't work outside of North America. So if you're outside of North America, the best way to get on the list is to go to the savvyaviation.com website and click on the link that says sign me up for the newsletter. My books are available at the EAA bookstore, the Aircraft Spruce, and on Amazon. And if you have read one or more of them, I would appreciate it if you would post reviews to Amazon. I do a monthly podcast with my colleagues Paul New and Colleen Sterling called Ask the A&Ps. We have a lot of fun with the podcast. It's a call-in show. It's modeled after the old NPR car talk program, Click and Clack, the Tappet Brothers. So we would love it if we like stump the IA kinds of questions, and if you would like to participate in the podcast, send your questions to our producer Ian Twombly at podcasts@aopa.org, and he'll schedule you for the next recording session. We typically record the podcast about the middle of every month, and then they take a couple of weeks to edit it and clean it up, and then it's released the first of the next month, and it's available on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. It's pretty widely disseminated. Upcoming webinars. The September webinar called "What Price Speed" is actually talking about how to fly for how to fly in a way that optimizes fuel consumption. And I just took a very painful trip to Oshkosh and back with avgas mostly in the $7 to $8 range. So it's getting in a twin, by the way. So it's getting very interested. It's getting to be a pretty high priority to optimize flying, and so I want to talk about how to do that in the September webinar. October webinar is kind of a follow up on the similar subject of this one. It's called "On a Short Leash," and it talks about specifically how we work with shops to try to keep annual inspections under control and do only what the owner wants done and not more. And then in November, I'm going to do a webinar called "Away from Home Breakdowns," where I'll go through a dozen